This video is about how to do the starch iodine test to help you determine when to start picking your apples. Let's talk for just a minute about the sample that you're going to take. It's not a random sample. You're going to be picking apples that you're interested in. You're not interested in culls, you're not interested in sunburned fruit, you're not interested in insect damaged fruit. You want to pick the best fruit in your orchard on which to do the test. When should you start taking samples and testing your apples? I would say that you should start at least 10 days before you think that you're going to start harvesting. You could even go 2 weeks before you think you're supposed to start harvesting. You don't want to be caught by surprise. A sample consists of 12 apples. So you would walk and pick 6 apples down one row, walk over several rows, pick 6 apples coming back, and that's your 12 apples. If you have a really big block of several acres and you know that one section matures earlier than another section, take 2 separate samples. Don't mix them together, because you want to know is the early fruit when that's going to be ready and when the later fruit is going to be ready. Because you're going to pick fruit that's well colored, 7 or 8 of the apples in the 12 are going to come from the side of the row that gets the most sun, and maybe 4 or 5 apples will come from the side that gets less sun. Now you've got your sample, you have your 12 apples, and you're going to stain them with an iodine solution in order to determine the state of maturity they're in. And the packing house has iodine solution. All apple growers can go to their receiving station and pick up one of these spray bottles of iodine, and with it we have charts, starch charts, an entire pack of starch charts for you to use when you do your starch test. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut the apple in half and stain it with the iodine solution. It's important that you cut the apple through the seed cavity. It's got to go through the seed cavity. And you can see that we've cut it right through the seed cavity, and we'll take, it doesn't matter if you use the stem end or the calyx end, as long as you've gone through the seed cavity. If you miss, if you cut, for example, like this, and if you miss, and if you starch this, it's not going to give you the pattern that you're looking for on the starch chart, and this will be kind of a meaningless result. So if you miss the seed cavity, take the part of the apple that still has the seed cavity in it and cut another section off so you hit the seed cavity. Let's talk a little bit about using the iodine solution. We're giving these to you in spray bottles, so you can spray them if you want, or you can pour some of the iodine solution out into a bowl or some kind of a container and dip them. There's people who prefer to spray, and there's people who prefer to dip. I'm a dipper. And in our lab, we always dip. And I kind of recommend dipping. If you're going to spray, either do it outdoors or in a well-ventilated room. This only will spray in a very fine mist, and I wouldn't do that in your kitchen. Okay? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take some of this solution out. This is just a lid of a yogurt container. So that's a very small, it's not very much. We should be able to stain. You just touch the apple into the iodine solution, and it just a touch is all it takes. It doesn't matter if you use the calyx end or the stem end, but people like the stem end because it's a little handle. If you're going to dip it, you can hold it by the stem and do it that way. Once you've got the apples stained, let them sit for a few minutes for the stain to develop. The colder the apples are, the longer it's going to take for the stain to develop. If it's late October and you're staining fruit right in from the orchard, give it several minutes to develop. I highly recommend that you read the apples inside someplace under an artificial light where it's even and constant. If you have to read them or want to read them outside, you can do that, but I would then recommend that you do it in the shade. It's really difficult to read the apples well in bright sunlight. I am going to recommend that you take the fruit and line it up from darkest to lightest. You don't have to spend 25 minutes doing this, just do it kind of quickly. If later on you think, oh, I got a couple out of place, that's perfectly okay. So you have them from the darkest all the way up to the lightest. This has a lot of starch in it. This has very little starch in it. And this is more immature, this is much more mature. And that's what we're looking for. So we take the darkest and the lightest and we throw them out. And that leaves us 10 with which to do our test. We read each variety of apple with a specific chart. In your pooling regs on our commercial varieties, it tells you what starch chart to read for each of the varieties, and it tells you the starch values for A, B, and C categories. Now, today we're reading Sunrise, and with Sunrise we use the Jonagold chart. The starch charts go from, in whole numbers, 1 to 9, some go from 1 to 8, some go from 1 to 10. We can give zeros if there is no clearing on the apple. If the apple is entirely dark, we can give a 0. We can give half. If it's between 2 and 3, we can give a 2.5. So we go in whole numbers and half numbers. When you begin reading, you have them lined up from dark to light, and start with the dark. And here's what everybody does, and I think this is just a natural thing that people do, is that they look at the fruit, they look at the chart, and they instantly see a picture that looks like the fruit, and they say, that's it, and they want to write down that number. Don't do that. Stop and hold the apple up to the picture and ask yourself, could it be one higher? Sometimes you're going to get an apple that has a pattern that doesn't fit the starch chart. And when you get an apple that doesn't quite fit a pattern, what you need to mentally do is take all of the cleared area and in your mind push it down toward the center and match it to a picture on the starch chart. So you look at this and you think to yourself, oh, that's a 1. That looks exactly like a 1. But then you hold it up to this starch chart and you go, you know what? That's actually a little more than 1. It's not as much as a 2, but it's definitely a little more than 1 now that I really look at it. And therefore, I'm going to give it a 1.5. So we look at the next one. It looks very similar, but there is just a little more clearing, and we're going to give it a 2.0. So now we'll go to this one. It's definitely more than a 2. It's got the 2 in the center, but he's beginning to get some clearing out in the cortex, so we're going to give that a 2.5. And we'll go to this one, and it's pretty much just like the one that preceded it, and we will give that another 2.5. Now we have one that is light around the edges. It is somewhere between a 2.5 and a 3, and in this case we're just going to pick one. Let's go 2.5. We'll go 2.5 with this, and the next time we get to one that we're trying to decide between is it this or this, we'll go high, because on this one we went low. When you get these apples that are on one side either really advanced and the other side is not advanced, read each side separately, add them together, and divide by 2. Okay, so we say this is a 2, this is a 6, so the average is 4. Is this a 4? Is it a 5? I think this is a pretty clear 4 to me. Here we have a split personality apple. Here we're on this side. I am going to call that a 3, and we're going to call this a 6, which is 9, and that's 4.5, 4.5. So this is our most advanced apple, and we look on here, it's more than a 5. It's really not as advanced as a 6, so I'm going to call it a 5.5. 10 readings, it comes to 32.5, and there's 10 apples, so we shift the decimal place by 1, and our average starch is 3.25. So that's a starch test. Okay, so to summarize, you starch the apples, you stain them with the iodine. After the stain is developed, you line them up from low to high, that is dark to lightest. And once you have them lined up, pick out the darkest and the lightest and throw them away. That gives you 10 apples with which to read. You read them, you write down the numbers as you read them. When you're finished, you add them up, divide by 10, and that's your starch average. Starch generally moves in our newer varieties, and I'm talking about Gala, Ambrosia, Honeycrisp. It moves at about 1 to 1.5 starch units per week. That's not guaranteed, but that's an approximate average. In our older varieties like Red Delicious and Macintosh and Spartan, they move more slowly. They will often move less than 1 starch unit a week. Once we hit that value where you should start picking, starch will move even faster. It'll move faster than 1.5 units per week. It's in that period up to the beginning of picking that it moves at 1 to 1.5 units a week. From our experience here, there's a tendency to read the numbers low, where the final average might be 3.0, the actual average read by people with a lot of experience. People who don't have a lot of experience might read it as low as 2.0, a full unit lower than what it is. So you might want your starch value to be low, but it doesn't help you by kind of reading it low, biasing yourself and reading it low. This information is for you. It's not for the packing house. And the better that you do this, the better the information you have on which to make decisions for your orchard.